Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Digital marketing has moved forwards, but most consulting firms haven't. Many consulting firms still see their corporate blog as their sole digital marketing channel and find themselves frustrated when these blogs yield little, if any, results. For those consultancies that understand digital marketing, though, it can be a huge asset and help them achieve rapid business growth. In fact, at Create Engage, we've recently written a case study of one successful consulting firm that used digital marketing to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years. Having spent countless hours researching consulting firms and consulting leaders for this podcast, it became very clear that while some firms do digital marketing well, the vast majority of consulting firms struggle to leverage its power and don't know where to start. To help those of you who want to harness the power of digital marketing to grow your consulting business, but don't have the knowledge, capacity, or in-house capability to do so, I launched Create Engage, the first digital marketing agency for the management consulting industry. As former consultants ourselves, we understand the challenges that you face when it comes to delivering effective digital marketing that engages prospective clients and generates leads. Having worked in the industry, we understand consulting buyers, what resonates with them and what doesn't. This enables us to harness the latest in digital marketing in a way that aligns with your brand and your market positioning to attract the prospective clients that you're looking to target. We understand that each consultancy is unique and have a range of services to help you shape, implement, and sustain effective digital marketing strategies that deliver results, regardless of where you are on your digital marketing journey. If you would like to find out more about how Create Engage can help you use digital marketing to take your business to the next level, then send me an email at nick@createengage.co.uk or go to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can download that free case study that breaks down the digital marketing strategies used by one successful consulting firm to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years and gives you the secrets they used so that you can apply them in your own firm. If you want to outpace your competitors and stand out in the crowded consulting market, then get in touch. We'd love to help you grow your business through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climbing Consulting. In today's episode, I bring you the second part of my conversation with Q5. In this one, I speak with Rowenna Reid and Annabel Tonge, all about Q5's fantastic pop-up consulting initiative. It is one of the very few positive things to come out of the last 18 months. And it's something that actually having been a part of and been a client of here at Create Engage, seeing the benefit it's given us, knowing the benefit that it has given to many of their other clients, that I know that many other consultancies will want to learn from and emulate. In this conversation, Rowenna and Annabel share the whole story of pop-up and really give you a playbook if you're thinking of doing something similar. We talk about why Q5 launched pop-up, what their team get out of it, what the benefit is to their consultants, and why they are going to keep developing it and keep it going even after lockdown ends. If you are thinking of ways that your consultancy can do more to give back, or maybe you're simply just sick of painting fences and think there must be a better way to do CSR, then I know that you are going to love this episode. So, with all of that said, please enjoy today's conversation with Rowenna Reid and Annabel Tonge. Rowenna, Annabel, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great
Nice to be here.
So I've just caught up with Olly, having spent a good hour chatting to him 3 years after our last interview. And one of the things, obviously, we spoke about and we're here today to talk about is Q5's pop-up consulting, which I know us as a business have benefited from. I know a lot of other organizations have benefited from. And I'm really keen to dig into, because I'm sure there's some really valuable insights from my audience who are thinking of setting up similar or are just curious about what it's done for you and the firm. But before we do that, I'm conscious not everyone listening will know the two of you. So it'd be great if we could start with just a short bit on your background and how you got to where you are today. Rowenna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nick. So and actually Annabel and I got quite different backgrounds, which will become clear momentarily. But I've got a consulting background. So I've been in consulting for sort of 10 or so years after moving over to the UK from New Zealand, where I'm originally from, via Australia and France. And I've always worked predominantly in sort of transformation, change, org design, that kind of thing. And particularly over the last few years, very much focused on the people side of change. And I've worked quite a bit cross-sector actually. So in sort of both across the private sector and also public sector as well, which actually some of my experience lends itself quite well to pop-up, which will become a bit more evident as the conversation goes on. So yeah, that's a bit of background. And I think as well in terms of my role at Q5, I lead the pop-up program. I have done for the last 6 months or so, and I balance that alongside some client work as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. And we will dive into that very soon. And Annabel, how about yourself?
Yeah, so as Ro was just saying there, my background's quite different. I've actually been working for over 25 years, which I can never say without laughing because I can't quite believe it, but not in consulting at all, actually, predominantly in sales, marketing and more general management. So work for some great companies like Procter & Gamble, Hallmark and Apple Green and SSE actually, but obviously no company better obviously than Q5 where we are now. And I joined Q5 to help develop the business in the north. So that's when we opened up the Leeds office. I also am the director that looks after the marketing and the brand, and also obviously now quite heavily involved in pop-up. And that's partly because I'm a trustee outside of Q5, and I've also always had a natural kind of passion for charitable work. And so I always think that Ro and myself, we really complement each other because she brings all that consulting brilliance. And then I'm usually the practical one saying, well, actually, how we can make this work in reality? Or have I seen this somewhere before? So we usually complement each other pretty well.
Yeah, I'd say we always do, Annabel.
Fantastic. And I think, really interesting to hear the difference in your backgrounds. I think, Annabel, like you're saying, not coming from that consulting sort of background, and we'll come on to some of the sort of, you mentioned you're the director for marketing at Q5. We'll come on to sort of actually how this has benefited you from, a client perspective. But Rowenna, to start with, obviously you lead the pop-up, and I just was given a brief overview of what a pop-up is from Olly, sorry, not what a pop-up is, why you launched the pop-up. But I'd love to actually, for anyone listening, to help them understand, when someone asks me what is consulting, it's pretty hard to explain. So I'm going to challenge you and say, what is a pop-up consulting project? What is pop-up consulting?
Okay, so good question, because it's probably not completely apparent apart from something just sort of appearing. So pop-up essentially is, it's our pro bono offer at Q5. And as Olly may have explained, we launched it at the start of the pandemic last year. So just sort of, what's that, close to 18 months ago now.
Yeah.
And essentially what the offer is 1 to 2 days of pro bono consulting support, typically from a team of 2 to 3 Q5 consultants who volunteer to help alongside their commercial client work. And we basically provide support to charities, not-for-profits and small businesses. So sort of the key, criteria is that it's a company or an organisation that's small and doesn't have its own consulting budget. That's sort of the very sort of key criteria. And we essentially help them with a particular, usually strategic or operational challenge that they're grappling with. And the support typically is centred around running 2 virtual workshops where we, facilitate some very effective sort of discussion, challenge, debate around whatever their particular challenge is. So that's broadly how it works. Does that sufficiently provide a bit more detail? I could go on a bit more, but I think we'll probably end up covering different aspects as we go through.
Yeah, no, I think that gives a great primer. And, I asked the question almost knowing a little bit of the answer, having been through one as a client of yours, but I think really helps frame that, because exactly, when you say even 1 or 2 days of consulting, that can sometimes feel quite broad. What does that actually mean? But the approach you described there really makes a lot of sense. And again, just so that anyone listening can help them place sort of the amount of these you've done, sort of actually, how many of these have you run over lockdown? And love to understand that.
Yeah, sure. So we've got a sort of a rough target of doing 1 a week, which we've now,
Wow.
And we've exceeded that a bit, not hugely, but we're now close to 70 organisations. And that's across a whole mix of, like I said, charities, not-for-profits, and some small businesses as well. And we're deliberately very broad and I'd say inclusive with who we support. So we've provided support across many different sectors and social issues. So, education, poverty, food waste, homelessness, mental health, asylum seekers, like sustainability, like loads. which has other sort of, benefits as well. But yeah, that's sort of the offer is very broad in that sense.
I love that. And actually, I want to come back to your point around doing one of these a week in the operational side, because I'm sure that's no mean feat. But I guess starting with the benefits side, that sounds like you've done some great work for a lot of organizations. And while I don't think this is purely a CSR thing, obviously it has a sort of CSR component and element. And I'd love to understand actually, how have those charity organizations that you've been doing this for responded? Because I think, in our industry, it's very common for consultants who are highly expert and, paid large sums by their clients a day to go and do a CSR day, which is inevitably painting a fence or clearing a playground. And look, that needs to be done. It's valuable. But I'd love to understand, particularly for anyone listening, thinking about how they can better utilize those consultant skills. Like, actually, what are some of those benefits you've seen for your clients and what those clients have sort of fed back to you in terms of the impact the pop-ups have had for them?
Shall I answer that, Ro?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you answer it as well? Because we're both coming at slightly different angles. Because I suppose from a sort of I'm coming at this from a business point of view myself here, but what we offer is a sort of a short, sharp intervention, usually to address a particular exam question. So there's something that they're grappling with. And in the early days of the pandemic, that was actually things like cash flow. How do we actually stay alive for the next kind of 6 to 12 months? And then as things kind of developed on, the problems or the exam questions developed on. But I think what we allow is a short, sharp intervention to solve a particular problem or challenge that they've been grappling with. So I remember very early on, there was an organization whose entire business model revolved around big sporting events. And suddenly those big sporting events just didn't exist anymore. So it was, how do we survive for the next 3 to 6 months? How do we quickly pivot so that we're still viable as an organization? And in 2 sessions, we came up with a plan, which now has led to them going from absolutely strength to strength. So I think there is genuine, tangible financial, improvements to SMEs, but then there's also short, sharp interventions for charities to help them solve some of their issues. Well, what would you say?
I think, well, firstly, Nick, I agree. I know what you mean when you talk about painting fence. I remember painting walls a few years ago. I think there's a couple of things. I think ultimately our starting point for pop-up is, although we have kind of a standard offer, it's very much not just a cookie cutter approach. So the starting point is a very sort of careful scoping call where we really understand what is the challenge that the organisation is grappling with. And like Annabel said, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was much more about survival and helping to navigate the immediate disruption. And then as time's gone on, the sort of areas of support we cover has become a bit broader. And now it's essentially any of the areas of expertise we have from our commercial work. But the point is, it's very much structured on what they specifically need help with. And then we tailor our approach, as opposed to us just saying, we can offer you this, be that painting or whatever it is. So I think that really helps. And I think like Annabel said, it's a specific intervention, and we're very, very clear. And this is one of the things we've sort of learned as time goes on. We set expectations very clearly about what makes the process successful. So it's very much not us getting a brief, going away, writing a report, giving them an answer. It's very much a collaborative process where we, structure a session and work out how to facilitate it and what expertise and insights we need to bring into the session. But very much it needs to be a collaborative discussion where the organisation and whoever is joining from their side bring ideas, bring input, and we have this really helpful debate and discussion. And I think that's a really important point in terms of how it works well. And I think the other thing I would say is we're clear as well in that it's not about getting to a very polished, finished product at the end of the process. It's more so about helping to shape, challenge, and develop thinking. And I think, given I've said it's sort of 1 to 2 days maximum support centered on a couple of workshops, you've got to be realistic, right, about what ultimately you can achieve in that time. And I think just making sure that expectation is clear and understood is really helpful. But ultimately, often, as with many organizations, but particularly some of these very small charities and businesses, they're so constrained in terms of time and pressures that they often just don't often or ever get external perspective and challenge from, external stakeholders. also they just don't often have the time together as a team to be taking a step back and thinking about some of these bigger issues because they're in the day-to-day operational grind day in, day out. So that's another benefit we often find, that people are like, God, it was just so, so helpful having that dedicated time to think things through.
Yeah, and I know, for my team, it really was. And I think there's an interesting question there around, being realistic with expectations for the sort of organizations you're working with. Actually, how do you help them understand what would be a good pop-up challenge? Because we, having been a consultant, we all know that there's good consulting buyers and there's bad consulting buyers at sort of large organizational level. A lot of these charities and small businesses you work with have probably never engaged a consulting firm. So actually understanding what's the best way to use you can be quite hard. How do you help them understand that?
So I think it's just about having, and this is one of the things I love about consulting, one of those very open sort of exploratory conversations at the beginning of the process where we ask them in advance to give us they do a sort of a self-assessment kind of form in advance where we get an idea of what their challenges are. And then we essentially just say, what challenges are you experiencing? What are you grappling with? And I think because I've got a fair amount of consulting experience and just, business experience, you kind of can, you just kind of go through a logical conversation where you identify, okay, what's the biggest challenges? Quite often it could be that they've got a few different things going on, but it makes sense in terms of the sequencing. Like if they're grappling with something to do with like strategy and then something to do with fundraising and something to do with their team effectiveness, you might say, well, actually, in order of what we can help with, we could help with all of those areas. But actually, given you've got some strategic challenges, it would make sense to address those first. And then we can work out, or you can work out subsequently, what fundraising you need to meet that strategy or how you need to get your team working effectively. So I guess it's just leveraging, to answer your question, it's leveraging, core sort of consulting skills of asking questions and listening and trying to do a bit of problem solving. And then ultimately making sure that they agree and are comfortable. And I think because, we're typically dealing with, it might not necessarily be the CEO of the charity, but it's normally somebody from the senior team or who's got, the right level of decision making and understanding. You can reasonably easily get to know what's going to be the area that's going to have the biggest impact.
When you say it like that, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, like you say, I guess it's, and this might then sort of tie on to one of the other sort of angles of actually the benefits it's given you. You mentioned around it as a consultant, you're using your skills. I'd love to know how it's helped your team. And actually, Olly mentioned the reasons, particularly when you had a large bench, it was a chance to give people that sort of outlet. Obviously, you've kept it going. As I understand, you're very sort of, you're almost at capacity at the moment. You're flat out. So it sort of evolved from there. But I'd love to understand actually how it's helped your team, to develop those skills, how it's helped them from a career perspective. Annabel, I don't know, you mentioned you run the Leeds office. How's it sort of helped your team up there?
Yeah, we could probably both give you a set of answers here, actually, because there's so many benefits to pop up. Obviously, it came from the right place. It came from the heart, and it was in response to wanting to do something and make a difference and contribute in a way that was meaningful for us. But in terms of for our people, it's given a huge amount in terms of well-being and personal development. So, that desire to give back, particularly when you're on a long-term project, people often say, gosh, I've been on something for 6 months. I'd really like just to do something a little bit different, even if it's for a couple of days, or I'd like to try my hand at a particular thing. Like I've been doing organizational design, but I'd really like to learn more about strategy. It really gives those opportunities to say, well, with very little time commitment, step out of your day-to-day, try something new, personally developed, enroll, but also give back, make a positive difference and contribute to what is our response to the pandemic. So in terms of well-being and also personal development, it's been huge. In terms of for Leeds, it's also been great for us geographically. We've supported a huge number of organisations in the north of England, and we've reached out, and they've also similarly reached back out to us to say, we had a great experience with you. Would you help this organisation? And that helps us to be part of the community and the narrative of Leeds as well, and part of the pandemic response. So there's multiple positive reasons for doing it. But Rowan, you might want to talk about like the R&D aspect of it as well, because there's sort of a larger part for Q5 as well, isn't there, in terms of development?
Yeah, sure. And actually, it's interesting because I think we set it up so rapidly. We didn't, I think, it wasn't like we had a lot of time, or we didn't take a lot of time to think about what all the benefits could or couldn't be. It was more just a reactive thing when the crisis happened. So I think we've all been quite surprised at how many additional benefits there have been for us as a firm. So just to add a little bit more to what Annabel said, I think that we sort of talk about pop-up being like our R&D engine, and that we use it to develop and test sort of new offerings, new ways of doing things that we take back to our client work. So, for example, at the moment, we're sort of using it to test some new and develop some new thinking around our sustainability offer. We use it to sort of trial like new sort of quicker ways of doing things in workshops that we can then take back to client work as well. So I think that's been really effective. And I think ultimately, because we're working with typically different organizations than we'd normally work with in different sectors and also extensively in the third sector, it's giving us a whole lot of new experiences and perspectives that may not seem directly relevant to some of our client work, but actually I think the benefit of any good consultant is having that variety of experiences and just getting that exposure to lots of different issues. So I think that's another brilliant benefit. I think also it's becoming, I think, a key part of our employee value proposition, both in terms of, people who are currently in our team and want to find a way of giving back, but also, I've noticed just recently I've done a couple of interviews for new joiners, and they've both been very curious about pop-up. And I think increasingly people and also our clients are expecting us and organisations in general to give back and show how they're, making contribution to society and to communities. And pop-ups are a brilliant way of doing that.
There's a lot of interesting points in there, and I'm going to pick on a few of them. I think starting that point around, the employee value proposition, I guess in itself, it kind of it gives some of your more junior team members a chance to almost test out being more senior, if you like. And I'd be interested how this has gone down, because when we all joined consulting at some point, you read the brochure and it says you'll be advising CEOs on strategy. And as you quickly find out at 21, that's not the case. But actually, I imagine, and you two can tell me sort of in these pop-ups, I imagine actually you can be a sort of 21, 22, 23-year-old consultant advising these organizations on strategy and guiding them. And I imagine that's both quite rewarding for the consultant, but also teaches them a lot of skills that, frankly, you wouldn't want them to try out if you're with the CEO of, global client X.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a great example, actually. There's a brilliant charity up here in Leeds, and a very competent Q5er who said, I want to demonstrate my leadership skills. I want to own this and run with this and actually use this then as evidence for what I can do, so that when the next opportunity comes up, that there's obviously an evidence trail to say yes, and this Q5 is more than capable of leading a project. And he grabbed that opportunity by both hands, and as a consequence, then in the next resourcing meeting, people are saying, yeah, he can absolutely do that. I've seen him do that. I've seen the result. It was excellent for the client. And, and again, it's an opportunity to show your skills, hone your skills, or develop your skills, and demonstrate them to the broader ecosystem, but at a relatively low level of risk. And I think that's the beauty of it. It also allows you to be creative, try something new, knowing that actually the client is incredibly generous in terms of if something doesn't quite go right, and then you can quickly pivot and do something different. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. And then we've also got, the way we structure the team will make sure that there's the right sort of safeguards in place, so to speak, so that, there's the support there if needed. So we'd always have a very senior sort of experienced person in the team, and then there could be, typically there's somebody a bit more junior as well. So there's always the right level of support and challenge. But ultimately, it's completely up to, if people want to step up, as Annabel just described, that's really encouraged, and it's a great opportunity for people to do that.
It's a wonderful shadowing opportunity, isn't it, Ro? Because there's sometimes people say, I'd love to spend some time with this Q5er and see them in action. And, and you can do that for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, learn a huge amount, and then take that forward to your next assignment.
Exactly. Particularly because increasingly, we do still do, we do a range of commercial projects of different lengths, but, increasingly we're doing, longer projects that people might be on, teams for like 6 months plus at least. So it's a great way for them to get experience doing something else, and also gives them exposure to, because each pop-up is essentially like an end-to-end mini consulting project in terms of the initial, building the pipeline, getting the lead, following it up, scoping it, putting the structure together, resourcing it, running the sessions, blah, 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 blah. So, you really get that end-to-end exposure, which, often you wouldn't get until you're a bit more senior within consulting.
I think really importantly as well for Q5s, particularly new ones that are coming into the business, it sees us actually like living our purpose. So our purpose is all about organizational health. It's about making organizations better. It's about making a difference with every interaction, so that, when the client, whether it's a bit of advice they're giving or it's an actual session, the client is actually getting benefit from being with Q5 every time that we interact. And I think pop-up is a brilliant way or articulation of the company itself and the brand and the purpose of Q5 and really what we're all about. So it's very genuine.
I think some great both examples and points there, and actually how, I guess, the unintended benefits of the pop-up. And I guess it might be one of the ones you've just described, or it might be something else. I'd love to know, for the two of you sort of having been so closely involved in it, which one stands out as the most surprising? Is there something that you thought has just sort of knocked you off your feet? You thought, I never realized this was going to help us or our clients or our pop-up organizations to do something?
I think, and I kind of alluded to this before, in some ways, I think because it was so reactive, I think a lot of the wider benefits have all been a bit of a surprise. I guess the one that is not so much surprises me now, but I find it personally really quite, I guess, rewarding and quite sort of exciting, is just all the additional opportunities that continue to come up because of pop-up. So, we haven't mentioned this yet, but, we've, in the last few months, we've formed a couple of partnerships. So we've got a partnership with a brilliant social enterprise called All Together. They provide pro bono support in the form of mentoring from CEOs of very established businesses to CEOs of more up and coming businesses. And so we have sort of cross referrals and agreements with them, and we do some joint events and content. So, my point is, it's another example of just an additional opportunity. Mm-hmm. Another example, we recently got the chance to offer some of our pop-up beneficiaries a scholarship to attend a very prestigious course at Oxford University. So, there's loads of these additional benefits and opportunities that come up. And I mean, we don't quite know exactly what will happen over the next, what else might come up in the next sort of months and year or so ahead. But I think for me, that's probably one of the really additional and quite exciting benefits. And it's interesting to see what else will transpire.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's interesting though, isn't it? You think the benefit and the value is in the 2 half-day sessions or 2-day sessions or however we work it. But actually what we've found over time is that there's almost like a long tail of benefit for the recipients, whether it be through other partners or we've connected them to people, or they've seen things, or, and we've encouraged them into things. And I think there is an ongoing benefit actually to being a pop-up recipient. I think for Q5, the surprising thing, maybe I shouldn't be surprised really given my background, but that ability to really tighten up the brand identity, which was not the reason for doing it, but actually because it's such a fabulous articulation of who we are and what we do, it's allowed as a vehicle to really talk about Q5, that ambition of organizational health for all, and that in itself has generated then content and evidence that's who we are. And the great thing about strong brands is what you see on the inside is what you should see on the outside. And again, it's given us another vehicle to say, look, this is how we are on the inside. This is what we do. This is how we work together, and then take that externally and demonstrate that to clients and partners outside of Q5. So I think that's been an overriding benefit, I think, with my marketing and brand hat on.
Well, as someone who runs a marketing agency, Annabel, I'm always keen to hear about the marketing benefits of these things. But I think, to the examples you both gave, some really powerful examples. And, I think just the last sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes of our conversation has really sort of driven home the impact that it's having. I guess almost changing tack slightly, particularly for anyone listening who's kind of sold, they want to set this up for their own consulting firm. I'd love to understand some of the operational elements. And I think starting maybe, Rowenna, with your point, you've mentioned a couple of times today that this was quite something we started like on the fly. I know in the sort of webinar that you did on the pop-up, you mentioned you started, it was quite rough and ready. I'd love to understand, particularly for anyone who might be listening to this thinking, well, Rowenna, Annabel, this sounds great, but we're too busy. We're not a big enough firm to do this. Actually, how did you get it off the ground? And, maybe the extension is, if you were doing it again, what are the things you'd need to do, or someone would need to do to really start doing this in their own consulting firm?
So I think there were a few things. I mean, I think that the environment we were in at the time we set it up, which was, COVID had just struck. We were all suddenly stuck at home. There was this real crisis sort of emergency situation, and there was an urgency to what we wanted to do. So I guess in some ways that gives you an advantage because we knew we had to act quickly when we wanted to. But I think actually the principle remains and would be the advice I would continue to give, which is almost taking a bit of a MVP, a minimum viable product approach. So we knew we wanted to do something quickly. And it was almost like going back to basics and working out what is our genuine, real value that we can offer and trying to focus and leverage that. And for us, Annabel's said, our core purpose at Q5 is, helping to build better businesses globally. But essentially what that means is bringing some really, really good insights, asking really effective questions, effective facilitation, helping to shape thinking. And it was just about structuring some sessions and some support that really leveraged our core purpose and our core expertise rather than going off and trying to develop something completely from scratch. So I think that was part of it. So really extending our core purpose and what we do well naturally and what we've got, 10 plus years as a business of doing. And then I think the other point, which goes back to more the minimum viable product point, is that, and also you mentioned in terms of, as consultants, this sort of rough and ready approach, which perhaps we're not always quite comfortable with. There's actually something I find very refreshing. And actually it takes a fair amount of honesty and confidence to be comfortable with not being too polished. And I think actually that's almost the beauty of pop-up and what I mentioned earlier about the point we make to the organisation when we're starting to work with them. This is not about giving them a polished, finished product. It's about helping to shape thinking. And actually, when you think about our core value as consultants, if we think the core value is all the extra polishing of the slides and aligning boxes and stuff, even though obviously that's very important, that you're kind of missing a trick, right? So really what the value we should be bringing, and we do try and bring as consultants, is the thinking and the challenge and the debate and the discussion. And that's sort of essentially what we centre pop-up on, not about having, perfectly final deliverables and everything polished to the nth degree, even though I do like to align boxes, of course.
I can totally agree with everything you're saying there, not surprisingly, Rowenna. And I think another key point is that it is a creative process. And actually, that might feel a bit strange as a consultant when you're used to turning up with a polished pack. But actually, that is the beauty of it, is that when we set off on the road, and I'd say to anyone who's thinking about doing this, we didn't have the full thing worked out. We just knew we wanted to make a difference, and we knew what our values and our principles were. And actually what we said was we'll embrace this as a creative process. We'll start with as Rose says, we'll start small. We'll have a minimum viable product, if you like, and then we'll build it up over time, and we'll learn as we go along. And that's what we found, is that it's massively evolved over the last sort of year to 15 or 16 months. It's massively evolved from what it was at the beginning. It's definitely got more polished in terms of the slides because we've had more time to do it. But it's a creative process, and I think you have to embrace that if you're going to go down that road.
I think a really good point, and the MVP piece, and it being a creative process particularly. I want to come on to the evolution in a moment, but I just want to hold, Rowenna, you made the point around aligning boxes, and as a former or reformed consultant, I don't know, you can call me what you want. I do remember a lot of conversations that would end up being more about whether it's Calibri or Arial, and whether it's a square or whether they're aligned, than it is sort of what's the client value. That's no slight on anyone I've worked with, but I guess the question that leads me to is, like you said, as a breed of consultants at large, we focus on that sort of stuff. And there can sometimes, I guess, be a reticence about doing something that isn't perfect. The boxes aren't aligned will be the first thing the partner will notice. So we've got to get those boxes aligned, or we've got to have a full value proposition. And this may not have been a problem. This may have just been the Q5 culture sort of overcame this. But did you have any of those challenges helping people understand the principles you were building it on, that MVP approach? Did you have to, do anything to get people to buy into that? And I ask that for anyone listening who's like, my firm is all about aligned boxes and Arial, not Calibri.
Yeah, it's a good question. And you're talking about getting people aligned from the Q5 side as opposed to
exactly. Yeah, so getting everyone on the Q5 side bought into following an MVP approach, as opposed to a kind of make the perfect op model for the end result and then build it.
I think it's a very good question. And Annabel, it'd be good to get your views. I would say no. And I think it's because we were just very, very clear with the whole organisation. And Q5, being, there's about 150 of us, and we often have, we have weekly calls, company-wide calls regularly, certainly with the UK team. So my point is that it's it's a very effective way to get comms out and be very sort of collaborative and transparent, which I think really helps. So I think people immediately, everybody got the concept of it. And the flip side is, in order to make pop-up sustainable and to work, we have to have these time box interventions. So we say that, every pop-up is resourced from a team of volunteers who are doing alongside their, very busy, full-time client work. So there's actually not a lot of choice. And people will say to me, what's the time commitment? And I kind of say, well, it varies a little bit. It's we say no more than 2 days spread over several weeks. But in order to make that work, you can't. I mean, yes, they can spend more hours if they want to, making everything perfect and doing more research. But actually, the challenge I give to the teams is you need to sort of really limit what it is you're doing and work out where you're going to be able to provide the most value, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to manage it. We're not going to end up doing as many pop-ups because you'll be spending all that time doing all the extra stuff. So we challenge ourselves with that quite a bit in terms of how much time are we spending doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always really conscious that the value is in the brain power. That we are donating our time and our experience. And we tend to try and put together teams to match the exam questions. So often if it's a marketing exam question, Rowenna might ask me to get involved. If it's a strategy question, she might ask Joel to get involved. So, but it's because of it's because you've experienced or you've expertise in this particular area, and that's where we want you to put the time and the effort, not in terms of if it looks slick or not. I think the approach we have externally as well, that this is something that we co-own and co-create with you. So this is not, again, this sort of polished, slick, typical sort of consulting product that we are going to give to you. This is something that we are going to co-create together, and as a consequence, it could go in a number of directions. So it's not going to be the finished article when we set out. We're going to take you on a journey and move you through it, and get you to the place where you've got the answer to your question at the end of it. So I think it's partly the approach, and also, I mean, just back to what Ro was saying about the challenge, it sort of forces a very agile way of working, because sometimes when these things pop up, if you like, in people's in trays, it's very much side of desk that they're working on a big client, and it's like, can you help us out with this for a day or 2 days, or would you be interested? And you've got to be quite agile about how you approach that, because obviously you've got to give 100% to the client, and then think about a creative way of actually also delivering a pop-up.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. It's Parkinson's law, isn't it? That work will expand to the time you allow for it, and the inverse is true. If you've only got 2 days, you focus on the urgent and important, and not the not urgent or not important. I think is a really powerful sort of point to make, that you focus on the value you're giving, that insight, that's the asking the right questions, the framing the problem. To your point there a little bit, Annabel, explaining how different people are brought in at different stages for different pop-ups. I mean, that talks to an element of maturity around pipelining some of these different opportunities to deciding who's best on the team. And I'd love to understand actually how you have scaled this, because, Ro, you mentioned earlier that you aim for one of these a week. And actually, this is also not, this is not anyone in the organization's full-time job. How have you scaled pop-ups so that it is sustainable and doesn't become overwhelming? I don't know how many applications you've got, but let's say you get 5 applications or 10 applications a pop-up. 10's easier for my bad maths. That sort of 520 you've got to filter down to 52. That's just the tip of the iceberg. How have you built the, I guess, operating model around this to be able to deliver it at scale? I
think, as you'd expect with time and experience, everything's just become a lot slicker. So, we've now got, because we've done, we tend to provide support over, I'd say, 5 or 6 pretty consistent themes, be they sort of strategic or operational, fundraising, whatever it is. And so now that we've done multiple across each theme, we've got sort of a set of, or a library, so to speak, of past examples and templates to draw from, which obviously we tailor, and we sort of tailor to sort of suit the particular organization. But we've got a starting point, and I think that makes a really big difference. And I think there's some other things we've done in terms of just the end-to-end process. So I mentioned before a couple of things we do about the scoping, which is really, really important to get right. So we have now this sort of self-assessment form. We have a call, very early on where, and sometimes Annabel joins them as well, but, I'll ask some, pretty broad but specific questions that get into the specifics of really what the challenge is. So we scope it quite quickly. I think we kind of know now from experience what's the right number of people to bring in. And the approach I tend to take with resourcing is typically to try and have maybe 1 or 2 extra people on the team, because, and this just happened this afternoon, suddenly someone's like, I've got a pop-up I can't do, I've got client work. And so then at least that's the buffer that I use to try and manage it. So there's quite a few things like that we just are effective in now, and you kind of just figure out what works well, what doesn't, being really, really clear on expectations of not just the organizations we're supporting, but also the teams. So, I say to them, because I think everybody's natural sort of inclination as a consultant is to ask, like, I'll give them the notes from the scoping call, then they come back and they're like, what about this and this and this? And I'm like, look, I've had a half an hour call. I can only cover so much. And also, although we want to know everything, we have to actually challenge ourselves that you could often turn these projects, pop-up projects, into like, they could be full-time, like 8, 12-week pieces of work. So the challenge I give to the team is you need to sort of ask only almost what's really essential. And it's very much therefore realizing that in the pop-up, the people who are the experts still continue to be the organization or the client, so to speak. So yeah, there's quite a few. I think it's just making everything very slick from an operational perspective and knowing what works well, what doesn't. So like sometimes we'll run all the sessions on PowerPoint. Sometimes, and we've done this in the last couple of months, started to use Mural a bit more. So just use virtual whiteboards for the whole session. So not using PowerPoint feels quite revolutionary in some ways for a consultant. But my point is that can be a really effective way of, you set up some virtual whiteboards, and then you're not actually finessing lots of slides at all. So yeah, there's lots of things like that I think we just do to make it slick. Annabel, you've probably got something else to add to that.
Yeah, so Ro, just building on what you were saying there, something that came to mind was the way that we resource it as well internally. So it's very much voluntary. So people who put themselves forward for pop-up are usually doing it because they have a particular passion for the cause or the industry, or have a particular interest in wanting to learn more about strategy or organizational design or leadership development. And so that really helps us to resource and for people to contract in to spend the time doing pop-up. The other thing as well, I think, which is probably very typical to Q5, is that there's a very strong team effort. Obviously, if you step in and say, look, I'm going to do pop-up, that might mean that someone else has to have your back on something else outside of pop-up. And just the way that we're organised in terms of being an ecosystem and saying, okay, well, if you're doing that, I'll step in and do this bit, and then you can come back and do that bit. That sort of seamless movement of work also helps us to do it, because I know what you mean. It might be in different cultures. It might be, well, actually, if I'm block booked here, it's almost impossible for me to get out and do something outside of projects. But it's just the way that we're structured. It sort of really lends itself to that, 1 or 2 external interventions.
Really interesting to hear, and some great sort of tips in there, and just insights. Probably things that help you with your consulting work as well. I mean, the idea of doing consulting outside of PowerPoint, Rowan, is probably revolutionary for most, but I suspect something many of your clients probably also value as well. So I'm conscious we're coming towards the end of our time together. And I do want to ask you both, there's some short wrap-up questions that I ask everyone, but I'd love to get your take, because I always love the differences and similarities. But before I do, I guess the last obvious question, and this probably ties us nicely back to where I left things with Olly, is, what's next for the pop-up? He mentioned that you're turning it into a company limited by guarantee, and I sort of smiled and nodded, not 100% knowing what that means. So I would love to know from yourselves, what is next? What is next for the pop-up, and where do you see it going over the next 12, 18, 24 months?
So I think like Olly said, so we're setting it up, so a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee, so essentially just its own entity. We did consider setting it up as a charity, and then for various reasons we've decided to set it up as this different sort of structure. But ultimately that's to give it its own, almost like, there's lots of reasons, but I sort of think the main reason is giving it its own identity, sort of alongside Q5, but within the sort of broader Q5 umbrella. And we've got plans to sort of integrate it within the Q5 Foundation, which is the charitable endeavour we sort of set up when Q5 was launched sort of 10 plus years ago. I mean, I think there's lots of different ways we can take it, which again is one of the things I find quite exciting. I mean, a couple of things that spring to mind, and particularly as I've been very heavily involved over the last sort of 6 months or so, I'm just seeing more and more opportunities to add additional sort of, not so much benefits, but different sort of mini offers to our core support. So in the last few months, we've started to really make quite a few introductions between organisations that might, say, offer a similar service, but in different parts of the country. So we might introduce them so they can share experiences. Recently we had a pop-up for an organisation that worked in Uganda. Then I spoke to another organisation that was also doing some work in Uganda, so we linked them together. There's lots of ways to connect people, which I think is really helpful. And also I think over the past few months, there've been a lot of very consistent themes that come up again and again. So one of the ones that has come up a lot, and I think it's all linked to this whole sort of move towards a lot more purpose-driven business, is this opportunity for increasing corporate and third sector collaboration. And the more, and this comes back to your point about very well-intentioned but often not particularly impactful paint fencing, the more we can help corporates, and this can come through our commercial work and our commercial sort of contacts, to genuinely provide really good opportunities and CSR and so on for organisations in the third sector. I think that would be a brilliant benefit, because there's so much that can be achieved from, third sector and private sector collaboration, but often it is just slightly misaligned. So that's an area that I personally would really like to take pop-up in, and just developing things in that way. And, like I said, there's several partnerships we've got underway. So there's all different sorts of directions that pop-up could go, but ultimately it's about what will enable us to have the greatest impact. And I think as well, what will be most closely aligned with our Q5 core purpose, because I think that's when it comes naturally, and that's where it really is something that adds value rather than going off in a complete different kind of direction.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think there's some practical things we can do to sort of kickstart some of that activity as well. So, a few of the pop-up recipients have come to us and said, would you mind actually doing more of a round table? So a lot of us have the same issues or concerns, maybe in the charitable sector, for example. How do we adapt our fundraising? How do we adapt our social media? Could you get some of us around the table and talking? And that way we can learn from each other. And also, to Bro's point, you could then also extend that on to corporate potential partners, etc., so that you can actually get them in a room and get them talking and see where there's a good kind of fit. I also think, I hope that we will have inspired some other organizations to do the same thing. I mean, we did it because we wanted to respond to the pandemic. It was a particular moment in time, but what we've found is that the benefits, as we discussed today, have been, multiple, both for the recipients, but also on a personal level for the Q5ers, but also for the Q5 organisation as well. And I hope that maybe some of your listeners are thinking, actually, we could do something like that, and it wouldn't take a lot of investment, and we could do a bit of trial and error and just kind of get off the blocks and actually get stuck in. And that way we can all be part of the solution.
Yeah, I think a really powerful point, Annabel, and quite right. And one of the main reasons I was really keen to get you both on the show, because obviously you're living this, you've done it very successfully, and you do show that it can be done. And I think in a world, the world is moving towards more purpose-driven business, and I think a lot of organisations are saying a lot of things, but like you said earlier, Annabel, actually it comes down to living them. And Rowenna, like you highlighted, just simply sending your consultants out to paint fences isn't actually probably the best way to help these organizations, in the short or the long term. So both, I've really enjoyed this, and it's been great to find out. And as I say, I want to ask you both the last two questions. And these are, one is one I ask all my guests, one's a variation on a theme based on our conversation. So I'd love to get your answers to this. And the first, take this, related to the pop-up, take this more related to your sort of careers in consulting. But I'm an avid reader, and I always like to ask my guests, what's the book or books you find yourself recommending most often, and why? And I'd love to get your take. I don't know who wants to go first.
Can I go first, just in case we've got the same book?
Go ahead, Annabel.
Thanks. Okay, well, I'm sure Olly probably said The Magic Sponge, by the way, but I would say The Advantage by Lencioni, for anyone's in consulting. That is for organisational health and organisational design. That is a really good read, and it's not that long, and it's very digestible. So I would say that. Is that the same as you, Ro? Or do you?
No, I actually wanted to mention a book that I'd say is not a business book. Is that okay, Nick? Or would you want me to?
Please, yeah, no. Okay. It regularly reminds me that I should read more fiction books. So go on, tell me.
I'm a big supporter and very broad knowledge and experiences and so on. So I guess that's why I'd say I think it can become relevant. So there's actually two. I'll very quickly mention both of them that I've read recently, and I think both of them are brilliant. So one is called House of Glass by Hadley Freeman, and she's a brilliant author, and she's a Guardian columnist, and it's a absolutely fascinating account of her family history through the 20th century. Very, very interesting. All her family's Jewish, and it's just absolutely fascinating, and I couldn't put it down. And the other one, which you may have heard of because it was a bit of a, it came out, I think, last year, maybe the year before, and I've seen it a lot on Instagram and things, but I only recently read it, and I think it is absolutely brilliant. It's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie McKenzie.
Oh, yeah, I have read that. It's good.
I think my wife has been reading that as well.
It's got the most beautiful illustrations and the most beautiful messages, and I've since given it to about 5 different people, including several of my family members in New Zealand. And I just think it's got a lot of very poignant messaging, which is applicable in any sort of business or personal setting. So I'd definitely recommend that one.
Amazing, both. Well, some really good recommendations. And yes, I always like getting fiction as well as non-fiction, because I think, balance is important. I probably don't have enough balance in what I read. And yes, I didn't actually, Annabel, get a chance to speak to Olly about the Magic Sponge book. I know it well from sort of my conversations with him before, but I will put that in the show notes as well, because I think it's an incredible thing. And then the very last question, both, and this is, again, it's an adaptation of one I asked all of my guests, and I want to frame it very much around what we've talked about here, which is building a CSR initiative, for want of a better word. And it's quite simply, what one piece of advice would you give to someone if they were coming to you and saying, right, I want to launch a CSR consulting initiative? What's the piece of advice you would give them to set them on their way?
So I think for me, and we've sort of alluded to it, but I think it's making sure there's a natural fit with what your core purpose is as an organization, and therefore what your offer is, your CSR offer, because that way you're really leveraging your strengths and expertise, which in theory should make it much easier to achieve. And I think the other one I'd say is make sure that what you're offering is something which is genuinely aligned with the a benefit or a need that the people or the organizations you're looking to support have. So you're very much aligning purpose and need, and that's to, avoid the well-intentioned but often not very impactful CSR offers, which sometimes just don't really hit the mark.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think being authentic and genuine, it needs to be linked to your values, your DNA, actually what you do. So, in many ways, what we do with Pop-Up is because it's what we do and how we make our money, actually. So genuine and authentic. I would also say just loose guide rails. So you need to know what you're doing, but keep them loose, because it is a creative process, and be prepared for it to go in a number of directions once you get into it. As long as it's authentic and genuine and tied to your values, that's going to be okay. And then finally, just get started. Start small. Do something that is possible. You don't need to boil the ocean from day one at all. You just need to start small, get out there and try it.
Yeah. Done is better than perfect is a mantra that a very wise person said to me about, I don't know, it was about 18 months or so ago, a bit longer. Yeah. And I think it's brilliant, particularly as consultants. We often have a bit of a perfectionist tendency. So I think that done is better than perfect is a good little mantra to try and live by, so to speak.
I think some great advice to end there, both. And I'm a big believer in done is better than perfect, particularly as a reformed consultant. I don't always know if it's Calibri or Ariel or if the boxes are aligned, but if my team are listening, they'll know. So, some things do carry over. And the last thing to ask really is anyone who's listened to this and wants to find out more about the Pop-Up, wants to find out more about yourselves, wants to sort of see what you've done and try and see how they can do it for their own firm, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
Well, I guess our emails are, annabel.tonge@q5partners.com, rowenna.reid@q5partners.com. You'll find us on LinkedIn, or, just reach out to info@q5partners.com, and you'll definitely get to us eventually without too many steps.
Yeah, and also for your listeners, Nick, we're always looking to, build our pipeline. So if there's anyone who is, affiliated in any way with a particular charity, a not-for-profit, or knows of a small organization, small business who might benefit from some support, please introduce us, either directly, or if you go onto our website, there's a Pop-Up sort of page with an inbox people can send a message to, but we'd be delighted to discuss how we could help.
Amazing, both. Well, I will put both of your details on the show notes that accompany this. I'll put a link to the Pop-Up page. And I think, really good point, Rowenna, around anyone who is listening to this who runs a smaller organization or knows anyone who is running a smaller organization, to get them in touch. Because having been one of your Pop-Up organizations, I know the value these initiatives have. We still use your OEM every strategy session here internally at Create Engage. So I know it's been really valuable. I think it sounds like it has for others. And so, for anyone listening, definitely recommend getting in touch. Thank you both both. This has been really, really enjoyable. Great to understand and get into the weeds of how you're helping so many people. And all that's left to say is all the best for the rest of your week.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. No, I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great discussion. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, both.
Take care.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.